Today in the EU, will the new Dutch coalition fight the EU or seek for solutions?
Dames en heren, we schrijven geschiedenis vandaag.
We are writing history today, Geert Wilders said, announcing the coalition agreement. 4 Dutch right-wing parties have agreed on a government program emphasizing nationalism and a tougher stance in Europe. They plan to seek opt-outs from European policies, despite knowing these efforts will likely fail. Does this mean that they are going for a strategy of confrontation with Europe or for cooperation? And will their Eurosceptical approach damage the country's credibility in the EU? Hello and welcome. I am Evi Kiori, and this is Today in the EU. To understand better the essence of Dutch politics, I'm joined by a special guest that knows the ins and outs on this, our publisher René Moerland. Hi René, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Evie.
So, in the Netherlands we have a coalition agreement that was put together by the PVV, VVD, NSC and BBB. Many acronyms, many different ideologies. Can you briefly tell us who are all these parties?
Indeed, Dutch parliament is the paradise of acronyms. 14 parties in the parliament. It's a very parliamentary democracy, so everything is happening in the parliament. And those 14 parties often have acronyms, indeed. But don't try to retain and learn them all. You know them very well, but not everyone who listen to us might be interested to know all the acronyms. The most important thing to know here is this is 4 parties in a coalition, and it's a right-wing coalition, ranging from center-right to a radical populist right, and that's rather exceptional for the Netherlands.
So who are they?
So the biggest party is the most radical one. It's the PVV. It's Geert Wilders' far-right populist party. It's the biggest one. It's 25% of the electorate. It's 37 seats in 150 seats parliament. And that's far from being a majority. That's always the case in the Netherlands. The biggest party will never be the majority. So they need other coalition partners. And in this case, it will be the VVD of the outgoing Prime Minister Rutte, Conservative Liberals. And they are now the junior partner. One of the 3 junior partners in the government. And there are 2 new parties, new on the scene. It's the Farmers' Party, Farmers and Citizens Movement, which is in Dutch BBB, but we say Farmers' Party. They didn't exist in the last elections, but they were there with 1 seat, and now they are bigger, still the smallest of the 4. And we have the NSC, New Social Contract, which is the party of a former Christian Democrat leader that now started his own party.
And what was it that brought all these parties together? What is the glue here, and is it strong enough?
So the real glue, and we're going to talk about the coalition agreement, is the agreement itself. It's the things they negotiated. Some win, some lose for every party, but that's actually what will be their common ground. There is a common denominator, though.
And what is that?
Compared to other Dutch coalitions in the past, they often tended to be uniting center-left, center-right parties. This case, it's really 4 right-wing parties. And they do have a difference of program than, for instance, the previous coalition led by Mark Rutte. They are more or less united on a harsh and strict migration policy. They are more or less united on a more skeptical approach in the European Union.
It has already been cleared out that Geert Wilders will not be the next prime minister. Now the question is who will be and how long will it take to name the next leader? Because we know that the previous coalition took 12 months of negotiating to create a government, so...
Well, it took them 6 months to negotiate this coalition agreement. So if you refer to the 12 months of the previous government, you might say, oh, that's even quick. But you would also see that power construction is relatively slow in the Netherlands. And same goes for leadership. Geert Wilders is very controversial, also in the Netherlands. He surprised actually the polls by becoming the biggest party in the elections. But for VVD and NSC leaders, so for the former Christian Democrats and the Conservative Liberals, it was really quite a decision to have a coalition with him. In the end, he only managed to build a coalition with them in exchange for the promise not to become the prime minister. He was not acceptable as a prime minister.
In a recent debate, Rob Jetten from D66 provoked Geert Wilders for not being allowed to be the prime minister.
En Fleur Agema politiek leider kunnen maken, dan gaat zij morgen naar het overleg en dan stelt zij mij voor als de nieuwe minister-president.
Geert Wilders shot back, suggesting he could resign and appoint Fleur Agema, a party member. But she will still announce him as prime minister, drawing laughs in the room.
Also, he's a very confrontational person. He has his rockish style that works probably also much better in parliament for him than when you are the prime minister and you have to take part in European councils and negotiates, for instance. He is really the attacker, so to say. But he has a problem.
What is the problem?
Geert Wilders' PVV is a one-man party. So everyone who's working with him in parliament is working for him, but doesn't have a say. He doesn't have teams of reliable other prime ministers. So he has difficulty in finding personnel because he will have a big voice in nominating the prime minister and then needs to have the agreement of the other three, but he doesn't have the candidate. That will take approximately up to another 5 weeks from now on.
And you mentioned a bit the policies they will be focusing on and the path they are going to take. And maybe we can stay on this a bit longer. You said that they have stricter migration policy. Are their policies clashing with what the EU is following?
Well, they themselves say it does, because in the coalition agreement, they say that they would apply for an opt-out of the European migration policies as soon as possible.
We gaan knokken voor een opt-out op asiel in de Europese Unie.
They also promise to install the strictest anti-migration policy ever seen in the Netherlands. And that entails some things that are not dependent from European legislation, like, for instance, creating austere shelter situations. So you prepare for people camping outside, maybe in rainy situation in the Netherlands, because there's not shelter for them. And that is just to frighten off other migrants to come. That's really what they want to communicate.
Yeah.
And same for the migration policies, whereas in general, they do promise to remain a constructive European partner. In practice, when you see the real only points that they put forward in the coalition agreement, the signal to Europe is we don't want to participate anymore in these kind of policies that we don't like. So it's really preparing for a clash.
Right, but if they're communicating that they don't want to collaborate with the EU, and they've also mentioned their intention to opt out from some European Union rules, is this even possible? And why is this the goal for this coalition?
It's very improbable. You can, in theory, opt out of everything, but in practice, when you want to really opt out of a policy, it's a big change that needs at least agreement of all the member states. So that will not happen. Everybody knows. They don't promise actually also to step out of the migration policy.
Okay.
They only promise to apply for it. So what are you doing then? And that's the question. I think the question you were asking, Evie, is the question everyone here in Brussels is asking. What do they want, the new Dutch government?
Exactly.
Do they want just to fight, or do they want to go for results? The Netherlands were known for not being, of course, the biggest country, but sometimes punching above their weight because they were very much engaged in generating results. And this new government seems to communicate something else. That's at least how it is perceived right now. To communicate, we want our position, we want to make our point, but we don't want to participate that much anymore. We want to stand more aloof instead of working hard to be constructive. Although they use the word constructive, in practice what you see is that they just say, we don't want to show solidarity, we don't want to be part actually of the bigger adventure of what's happening in the European Union, we just want what's in our interest. So, the practical consequence, if you promise things that you know that are already improbable, then you are actually preparing to tell your voters...
You're blaming somebody else.
Yes, you're blaming actually what's happening over here in Brussels to tell why you don't succeed in your policies.
Do you think these Eurosceptic points of action will end up damaging the Netherlands' reputation in Europe and in some way scale back its influence within the member states?
As things stand right now, so with the coalition agreement, that's not a government yet, of course. There's personnel coming in. Maybe that will be a very convincing European person, but it's not very probable. So it's probable that you have to prepare for a less actively engaging Netherlands. Of course, speculation can be that anyhow the European Union is taking a right turn after the European elections, but also maybe with upcoming elections in other member states, even more so than it's already the case. And then, of course, their position will be less radical. This feels a little bit like the early David Cameron. The early David Cameron wanted opt-out, and he communicated in all ways that he didn't want to participate anymore in the same ways he did before. And this is actually the same type of communication that we're seeing here. Nobody's talking of an exit right now. In the past, the Dutch exit of the European Union. In the past, Geert Wilders did, even in his electoral program, there was still a referendum on this, but he didn't mention it anyhow afterwards. And again, there is this sentence in the coalition agreement that they want to be a constructive partner in the European Union. But in reality, what they're communicating is, don't count on us.
And since we're talking about the shift towards the right, and here at Euractiv, we've been reporting about how the far right is gaining momentum in Europe. We saw this in the Dutch November elections as well. So what's your take? Why is the Netherlands leaning towards the right?
The main topic during the election campaigns in the end was migration. And migration has been linked to many of the also societal problems in the Netherlands. For instance, affordable housing. In politics, it became firmly linked to migration. And the conservative liberals, former Prime Minister Rutte's party, VVD, took a firm stance on migration in the previous government, and that's why it fell. That's why there were snap elections. So these conservative liberals, under the new leadership of Dinenje Zilkas, campaigned on migration, but the issue owner was Geert Wilders. And second thing happened during the campaign. It's as the united left front of Social Democrats and Greens had this leader well known in Europe, Frans Timmermans, who the center-right voters really didn't like. They probably chose to send a message to the leaders of the New Social Contract Party and the Conservative Liberals. So there is some speculation that actually the potential electorate of those two central right-wing parties was higher, but their own voters chose to give them a signal by voting for Wilders to team up with him. You cannot say of this government that it's not reflecting the outcome of the elections. So it's migration, it's partly also the dynamics of the campaign, but it's expressing a clear wish in the Dutch electorate to take a harsh stance on international matters like migration, also climate change, etc.
And will we see Netherlands imitating Viktor Orban's Hungary, or what is the model that we will probably see them following?
Yeah, it's still a little bit out in the open. If Geert Wilders has one friend in the European Union, it's probably Viktor Orban. And Geert Wilders, as mentioned, is the leader of the biggest party in this coalition. He will be in parliament, he will not be the prime minister, and he can never act alone. Especially the new social contract of the former Christian Democrat leader Pieter Omtzigt and the conservative liberals of the VVD. They are emphasizing that they want to stick to a center-right European approach. So he won't have the backing probably to be as radical as Orban is in the European context. But Wilders, on the other hand, is also a politician. He has been in parliament for several decades already. And he's an agenda setter. So I don't exclude that he is going to be the victim of everything that's happening in the coming years and then trying to set the agenda for later on. So this process of slow radicalization might still be underway. I don't expect really the Netherlands to have the same kind of positioning as Hungary in the coming years.
But not everything is rosy for the right-wing or far-right coalitions. We saw Rassemblement National ending its collaboration with the far-right German AfD. What's the real message behind this move? And is this comparable to what we will see in the Netherlands as well?
This is dynamics in the workings. We don't know exactly how this will end, but you do see some tendencies. And there again, it's interesting to compare what's happening in the Netherlands to other countries. For Marine Le Pen, she is a very serious contender for French presidency in 2027. For years already, she has the politics of what they call normalization. So teaming up with those radical elements in the already very radical AfD in Germany was clearly not in her interest. It's more in her interest, probably, to be in the same kind of situation as Meloni in Italy. Once she came to power, developed a more central European position by shifting a little bit away from a radical past. Now, if you compare this to Wilders, he has another background than Fratelli d'Italia or Rassemblement National. Those two latter parties actually come from a far-right background being really on the extremes and anti-democratic institutional situation. And now the question around them is, are they serious in getting more centrist?
And for Wilders?
He actually was a centrist politician, part of the VVD, being a liberal, conservative liberal. He split from the VVD 20 years ago. Then he radicalized. He became this very radical anti-Islam party, anti-migration, developed this a very harsh style, provocative style, always remaining within democratic boundaries for the moment, using populist language, even speaking about a fake parliament at a given moment in the Netherlands, but also operating within parliamentary boundaries. So the question about Wilders will be, will he radicalize more? Or will he, now that he came to power, also go back to his democratic roots, so to say? In the latter case, you'd probably not see him stay with AFD if the Rassemblement National is not there. So it's clear that on the far right side, hard right, far right, extreme right, this mix of parties, there will be like a kind of reshuffling after the elections. How this will end up, it's out in the open still.
So we can expect a watering down of positions in the Netherlands as well.
Yeah, probably we will see some watering down. But the question is this watering down temporarily? Is it just for now? Also, if Wilders will be in a position to say, okay, this is actually what we needed to do in the coalition agreement or in the European context, but I want to go further, then he takes the liberty that he will have in Parliament to be agenda setting again.
Thank you, René, for sharing your insights with us. I am Evi Chiori, and this was Euractiv's Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed or followed us yet, you can find us on all streaming platforms. Also, make sure to leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your reviews really help us to spread the word about our work. This episode was produced by Miriam Sáenz de Tejada, Nicoleta Yonta, and myself. Thank you for tuning in, and we will be back on Monday morning.